How does media influence politics? Oh, let me count the ways. There are many. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to go even deeper in this video, and I'm also going to tell you how candidates influence the media. What we're going to cover in the first half of this video is how the media influences politics. We're going to talk about what they cover and who they decide to cover and the impact that has on candidates running for office. In the second half of this video, we're going to do a deep dive into how candidates influence the kind of coverage they get from the media, and you're going to learn things here that you will not find on Google. Let's first get in the helicopter and go up and take a view of the landscape. What is media? Well, of course, it is newspapers. It is cable TV news stations. It is national news. It is syndicated radio. It is podcasters. Sometimes even people who write Substack posts influence what gets covered. Now, it isn't all done in isolation. And I'm going to tell you a story to illustrate this point. I was once scheduled to do an early morning appearance on a cable TV news outlet. I arrived early and I noticed a room filled with people who were there deciding what they were going to do that day on various broadcast segments throughout the day. And what did they have all over the desk as they were debating what to cover? Stories that had been in newspapers the day before, stories that were in the newspapers that morning. In other words, what was happening is they were looking at newspapers for ideas on what to talk about on the cable news that day. Why do they do that? It's because investigative journalists that work for newspapers are the ones that kind of dig up the meat and the facts and figures that go into their stories. Cable TV does shorter newscasts, but they can pick up the gist of it and steer their guests into talking about that topic during a 5-minute newscast during the day. The newspaper content and the cable TV content are picked up by podcasters. They end up in Substack articles. They end up on radio station news broadcasts throughout the day. So it's not just one media outlet. It is this relationship between all media that influences what is considered news over a 24-hour period, or what might be considered breaking news during the day. Your job as a candidate is to try and figure out how this works in your community by taking a look at various media outlets in your jurisdiction and how they relate to each other. Media has an enormous influence on what gets covered. In the past 18 months, there are days when I picked up the paper and the only thing being covered was the cost of living and the inflation rate and the job numbers. There have been other periods where the only thing to speak of on the front page was the war in Iran and the negotiations that were going on. There are other days when I picked up the paper and it's completely dominated by the implementation of a new immigration policy in the United States. So when you are a candidate and you want to be in the news, you have to be cognizant of what the news is covering at the time. It may or may not relate to things that you want covered or you want to do in your political campaign. So how do you worm your way into the news? We're going to cover that in the second half of this video. Now, just as important as what they cover is who they choose to cover. So when you are a candidate just starting out, part of the audience that you're trying to appeal to are the media outlets in your jurisdiction. You have a job to do, and that's to make them think that you are worth covering, that news from your campaign is worthy of being in the paper or mentioned on a cable news outlet. How do you do that? This is something I recommend to all political candidates, that early on in the campaign, that they reach out to prominent people in the community who are part of the news apparatus. The person at the newspaper that covers politics, the person at the radio station who decides what's covered that day, the booker or the producer of a cable news program in your community, the podcasters that you might want to talk to and say, just by the way, I'd love to be on your podcast someday. If you do that, you have put yourself at least on their radar screen. And then, once you've done that, you need to feed the beast. Because the worst thing that a news outlet can do to you is ignore you. Oh, by the way, if you've ever thought about running for office, I got the perfect gift for you. 12 essential steps to prepare for a political campaign. It's in the link below. Grab a copy of it before you leave. Okay, so we've talked about what media is. We've talked about what they cover, and we talk about who they choose to cover. That's the way they influence politics. Let's talk about you and pretend that you're a political candidate and presume for a second that you want to influence the way the media covers you. And there are several tried and true ways that campaigns actually influence the media. The first one is what we call oppo dumps. Reporters are busy people. They may see a race where several candidates are running. They do not have time to become an expert on all of those political candidates before the first interview or during the course of the campaign. So what do campaigns do? I'm going to tell you a story as an example of what an oppo dump is. I was working for a political candidate in a race for Congress once. We were about 3 months into the campaign, and I picked up the paper one day and noticed the name of someone who said that she intended to challenge my client in a primary. I'd never heard of her. So, of course, when I saw her name in the paper, I thought, okay, do due diligence. Who is this person? And she had portrayed herself as a 27-year-old wonderkind expert on war and U.S. defense policy. She was claiming that she started at DOD, at Department of Defense, as an intern, and by the time she was done working there, was sitting with generals helping to plot the Iraq War. I read that story and I thought something doesn't compute about this. I turned off everything in the office, cell phone, everything. And I went online and I learned everything that I could about this person. And it turns out that her story was a complete and total hoax. Nothing that she said was true. So I put together my proof and I put it all in a stack on my desk, and I called the chief political reporter of my local newspaper and said, can we have breakfast next week? We knew each other casually. We respected each other. He respected my acumen. I respected his fairness and his journalism. So we sat down in a diner and I said, at some point you're going to interview this new person who's jumping into the race for Congress. I've done some homework that I would like to share with you. Every fact in this stack of papers I'm going to give you has been documented so that you can check the veracity of everything I found. The bottom line is, I don't think that she is the person she's portraying herself to be, and you might want to ask her some questions when you do this feature interview with her that you're going to do next week. He thanked me. Of course, he read it Of course, he asked her about the discrepancies in her story during the interview. She lied to him. He published that in the feature story, and she was out of the race the day after. That is a classic case of what you call an oppo dump. Now, if you think that doesn't go on in politics, you're badly mistaken. There is a symbiotic relationship between political campaigns that put together the research on the candidates running for a particular job and the reporters who appreciate the fact that political campaigns have done a little bit of homework for them. No self-respecting journalist is going to buy that kind of thing hook, line, and sinker. But it is a tried and true way that political candidates and political campaigns influence the way politics is covered by the media. The second way that candidates influence the media is a little technique called a news hook. How do you worm your way into a story about the war when that's all that the newspapers are covering? Maybe you talk about the consequences. The working class people who are now paying more for gasoline than they were before the war started. The farmers who are paying more for diesel fuel. The farmers who are paying more for fertilizer, the inevitable fact that food prices are going to be going up because of the cost of fossil fuels. That is what you call a news hook. In other words, you look at a story and you say, how can I get my name mentioned in a story about this topic? So it's related, but it says something that you want to say. Every day, I scan the newspapers for clients that I'm working for in their jurisdiction, and I look at the headlines because they're all going to call me at some point in the morning and saying, what's our hook today? What can we post on Facebook? What can we post on Instagram? And I got to take what's covered in the media and make it relevant to their campaign. There are other ways beyond news hook to get yourself in the press. Hold a press conference, announce that someone prominent in your community has endorsed you, gather a group of people for a photo op in front of the local hospital to talk about the cost of health care. Whatever you do, just remember that your job is to get covered by the media in the ways that you want covered, and you should be thinking about that each and every day. There are 4 tried and true ways to influence the media in the way they cover you. They are called pictures, mistakes, polls, attacks. Pictures are irresistible to newspapers. If you have an event and the newspaper doesn't show up, take a picture while you're there, post it on social media, send it to the newspaper reporter and say, these people endorsed me today. Wouldn't you love to cover this story? Because this is big. If you have a poll that shows you doing well in a political campaign, polls tend to be irresistible to political reporters because they indicate where the public is headed in a particular race. Mistakes. This is part of the art of war, but if your opponent ever makes a silly, stupid mistake, never resist the temptation to pile on. And if you don't want to do it in your name, then gather a group of other people who will pile on your behalf. Create a drumbeat of people who won't let your opponent escape from a stupid mistake they have made, because your job when they make one is to keep it in the news for 4 or 5 days. The final thing, tried and true, is attacking one of your opponents in a political campaign. It's usually irresistible to the media because it's an excuse to cover a food fight. Food fights are part of the entertainment of politics, and it's very difficult for reporters to resist the temptation of you and your opponent going back and forth. So these are the ways that candidates influence the media in a political campaign. What I've talked about is just one aspect of a political campaign, of how media influences politics. But media is not the only thing that influences politics. Another big influencer in politics today is what we call social media. So while this is fresh in your mind, I'm going to invite you to watch another video. How does social media influence politics? Click the link below, grab a pen, because you're going to want to take notes.